All right, guys. Good to have you viewing this. Um, this is a live stream, and of course, we are here to look at the introduction to becoming a software developer. Okay, back then when I was about heading out into software development, started off from somewhere. I'm also here to share not just my experience, but the knowledge you should know as a beginner when you're jumping out to become a website developer. Not just a website developer, but a software developer. When it comes to software development, you need to put some things in check. As a software developer, you need to know there are a lot of technologies out there you need to have your hands on, and the experience it's not just the experience only you should stick to. You should also know beyond just the experience, you should also know, have your own, should I say, a knowledge behind the technology. So this video is to explore the technologies you should know as a developer or as a software developer or software engineer out there pertaining to front-end engineering, back-end engineering. And we all know that the very first technology if you're heading out into software development is HTML. So our introduction video, which is the video you are watching currently, will be looking at HTML. Although we'll also make a quick dive into other technologies as a software developer. What are those technologies you need to know and those technologies you need to build on as a software developer? Okay. So right away, I'm about to share my screen to let you know what you need to know and how to go about your journey in your journey of becoming a software developer. So give me a minute. About to do this. All right. Okay. So what are those softwares you need? The softwares you need to know or the technologies you need to get your hands on as a software developer you need to know. When it has to do with software development, I think the very first most common thing you need to know as a front end engineer, if you are jumping in from front end before getting the browser, as a front end engineer, you understand your web browser. And we have a lot of them out there. We have the Chrome, we have the Mozilla Firefox, and we have Microsoft Edge. We also have Opera Mini and so on, Brave, a lot of them. We have the Badu for the Chinese. We have DocDoc. Okay, hope I've forgotten this. Not even the language itself, not even any language itself, the web browser itself. How does it works? How does it works? Okay, one of the technology you need to understand about the browser is your parser, and secondly, the DOM, the document object model. Okay, after a quick knowledge on this, I think from here you can now jump into HTML. HTML is actually the very first language. Sorry, that my hypertext markup language. This is the very first language you need to understand as a front-end engineer. As a front-end engineer, you need to know how does your HTML works because HTML is not a programming language, although it's a technology that you can't do without as a front-end engineer. So when it comes to the front-end engineering, that's seeing how the browser works, the look, the styles, the feel of any product design and all of that. But UI UX is out of this. Okay. So you need to understand HTML. The HTML is a very important technology you need to understand. How does it work? One common thing I like saying about the HTML is that the HTML is a language that supports programming. Okay, although it's not a programming language, but we cannot do without HTML. It's a markup language helps to mark up a programming language. Like it it does a kind of act that is called browsing with a programming language. Ability to create a web-based product, and the product should need the www or needs to work through the browser or a browser search engine. Then at that point they are browsing as they are building a product, a website, a web app with Python. At that point you're browsing with Python. And you can, with what I've said so far, I can say that HTML is, so without the HTML, we can't apply our JavaScript to work on the web browser. Without our HTML, we can't see the result of our Python code on the browser. So that's why we can't do without the HTML. As a front-end developer, you need to start off with HTML. Okay, so with this quick dive, I think you now know to start off not just the language but to study the technologies. And the very first most important technology is the web browser. Understand the dynamics behind the web browser, what happens within the browser itself. That's the parser itself and the DOM. Okay, now with a knowledge on HTML, you can now move into either CSS itself or the JavaScript or any other programming language, which is the Java, which is like Python, or you can move into C++ and the rest. Okay, but this video will pay attention to our browser-based language, the HTML. Okay, I really want to have a quick look on the HTML. Within some few minutes, we should be done. Now, HTML itself is a very, very easy language to go, but it has a lot of theories behind it. In order to understand HTML, we have three ways we can go about understanding HTML. HTML has three classifications. When you're looking at HTML, which is the hypertext markup language, you classify it in three ways: classification by its syntax called the tag, and classification by level, which is the block. We also have classification by its uniqueness. That's when you're talking about formatting elements such as the phrase and the markup element. Okay, so in this video, we will take our good time to understand the three classification of HTML. Just like I earlier said, we have three classification. For the HTML5, we have the very first classification is classification by tag. We have classification by level, and then we have the third classification, which is the classification by, we have a classification by uniqueness. Typo error. Okay, so the classification by tag. Now, HTML has a syntax. The syntax for HTML is called tag, and a tag consists of three parts: the left angle bracket, okay. The second part is the element name with its associated attributes. And then lastly, the right angle bracket. All right, so putting this together, we can have a tag written as the left angle bracket, the element name with its associated attributes, and the right angle bracket. These make a tag in HTML. So this is how to write a tag or a syntax in HTML. The left angle bracket, the element's name, and the right angle bracket. All right. So with this being said, I'll jump to my code editor so that we can examine the four basic elements that makes the web page. Okay. Sometimes back then, a time ago, when I sat for my very first interview, okay, I was being asked to list the four basic elements that makes the web page. So it's what we are about to look at using our code editor. But however, before jumping to the code editor, I'd like to list them out. There are basically four elements that makes the web page. Basic elements that makes the web page. Four basic key basic elements rather. Let's have more emphasis on that, like adding more emphasis. Four key basic elements that makes the web page. The very first one is the doc type element. Then we have our HTML element, also known as the root element. We then also have the head element, and then lastly the body element. These are the four key basic elements page. Now, with your knowledge on this, on the doc type, the HTML, the head, and the body elements, we will use these four key basic elements that makes the web page to explain the classification of HTML element by tag. And we know that basically there are two ways of classifying HTML by its tag. To classify HTML by its tag, we either say that an element in HTML is either self-closing, either you call it self-closing, or you call it void, or you call it empty element tag. That's for the very first type of classification by the tag. Or we can further say that the second classification is either called a container or open close element tag or non-void element tag. All right, these are the two types based on classification by tag, classifying HTML element by tag. We have two types: the self-closing, or you call it void, or you call it an empty element tag. Or we can say that the second type is the container, open and close, or the non-void element tag. Now, with that being said, let's jump into our code editor to see how these four key basic elements that makes the web page, which of them is a self-closing, and how we can distinguish which is a container, which is a void, which is not a void or a non-void element tag, which of it is empty and which of it is open and closed element tag. So to do that, I'll jump into my code, learning how to code, becoming a good developer pertaining to building with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and its trap edit. And I dropped in the group chat that you need to build your structure, your project development, okay? Then right inside the junior level folder, you have your index.html, main.js, and styles.css, okay? So now we are about to work with our index.html to explain or to explore, forget about the main.js you are seeing, to explore the four key basic elements that makes the web page. Now, our very first line of code for the HTML is always the doc type element. It's the element that instructs the parser that the parser should treat our HTML is called a tag, and a tag consists of three parts. First, the left angle bracket, the element name and the right angle bracket. So in order for me to write my syntax for my HTML, I will start with a left angle bracket. Then since this is just like saying, just like having something like, if you want to say not true, to treat this our HTML as not as a document type. You know, the original meaning for the doc type is a document type. Trying to explain that the HTML is a document type. Negator will now treat HTML not as a document type like the MS Word document, but it will end up treating using HTML as a technology outside just being a document type. Okay. Symbol at the tail end to also stands for it plays a very important role by showing the version of HTML we are writing. Okay, it doesn't just stop at negating the doc type. Okay, changing the meaning of the doc type to become a technology. It also represents or give emphasis on the version of HTML we are looking out to write. So without the exclamation symbol, we are falling back to the older versions of HTML, the quick mode, HTML2, HTML1, HTML4. Okay. So, but with the exclamation symbol, we've now stated it that we are writing HTML5. So that's the line of code. Now the doc type here is an element instructing the parser that HTML is a document type. Do not treat it as a programming language. The next thing that follows after the doc type is an attribute. And then we can end our tag with the parser while trying to treat our HTML file as a document type. Hold on a bit. Please treat the HTML, this HTML file as an HTML technology, not just like a doc type. Okay. So this is what our very first line of code does. First, it gives meaning to the HTML file that we are writing, our code that we are writing, that it's a document type, that the parser should treat it as a document. However, the attribute here gives an additional information of telling the parser to take the code or our file not just as a document or a technology. Now, we all know that files has two parts, the name and the extension. It depends on the extension you are using to create a file that makes a file what it is, not the name. Okay. The name index here can be called anything. I can call it take mine. I can call it anything. It doesn't matter. It's the that matters. Okay, same thing with the JavaScript we are seeing here, the main.js. It's the .js that gives meaning to this file. Okay, it the extension here determines .docx. Let's say, for instance, I'm creating a new file. Let's say um, movie.mp4. The extension the MP4 makes it a video. If it was MP3, it will become audio. Can you see that? And if it was PDF, it becomes a portable document file. Okay. So it's the extension that determine the functionality or the use cases for a file. So I can't create this file calling it HTML, then I end up writing turning into JavaScript. In order to turn it to JavaScript, I have to change the extension. Everything about the very first line of our code, the doc type and the attribute. Doc type element you are seeing it has a lot, might have a lot of attributes to say. Sorry about that. Might have a lot of attributes, but one of the most common attribute that goes hand in hand with the doc type element is the HTML element. We can't just assign any kind of attributes to a particular element. Elements have their associative attributes they go along with. Attributes they can go along with. We can't just attribute to them. Okay. So this is the very first element that the very first most key basic element that makes the web page. The next, the HTML element here is actually called a root element, and it goes hand in hand with an element called lang, a short form for saying language, and we can set it to a value of English en. And the HTML element here is open and close element tag, unlike our doc type elements. You can see our doc type elements didn't need a duplicate. We just wrote the very first one without making a duplicate of the doc type. Unlike our HTML elements, after writing our HTML element, we have to, whenever you have to make a duplicate of a particular element tag, that element tag is open and close element tag. So our HTML element line of code is an open and close HTML element tag, or a container, or a non-void, a self-closing, or we call it stand-alone, or we call it a void, or we call it an empty element tag. HTML element being the second element or the root element is because all our codes for the HTML comes inside of it. We can't write outside the HTML. We can't add additional syntax or tag after the HTML element. All other codes and the syntax comes in between the HTML element, and this makes it the mother element because it holds all the elements inside, or any other source of code, the codings we are about to do, everything comes inside of it. So this is why in the DOM, document object model, it's seen as the root element. Okay, but in a code, or should I say out there in the tech ecosystem, you can see we as developers, we see the HTML element as the mother element. So right inside the HTML element, this is where we now have our head, the head element. And the head element is an element tag that also has a duplicate, meaning it has opening tag and then has a closing tag. And then in between the opening and the closing, we can add contents. So with this, it means the head element is a container because it can contain this. We can say that the head element, which is the third key basic element that makes the web page, is also a container or an open and close element tag. So if I should proceed with this, the next line of code, my fourth line of code, I will have my body, the last key basic element that makes the web page. Okay, so with this being said, we have seen or we've explored the four most key basic element that makes the web page. Okay, now to take it further, we use the head element tag. You can see this code like the HTML head you are saying. Okay, now the body is maybe some my neck down or from my shoulder down. That's where we have the body. Okay, so that's how to see or how to understand the four key basic element that makes the web page. With this structure, we can proceed. Now let's consider head element. For the head element, we have actually for the head element we have, this is where we store the sensitive information. So sorry about the way you are saying the comments. It's because I've been playing a lot with my. If you are already into HTML, you know that that's everything. Everything in HTML starts with a left angle bracket. So in our head element tag, we have this is where we store sensitive information about our product, our web product. Information such as the site icon, okay, the site title, the website title, the site meta description, the site character set encoding, and even its right in do should or should have inside our head element. We use the link element tag to do this. To accomplish this, we use a special element tag called the link element tag. It goes handy with the hyper reference, href. The H there stands for hyper, ref stands for reference, which you can assign it to a value. The value, let's say for instance, we have an image absolute part, okay? But the best is to stick to a relative part and not the absolute part, okay? So image or this resource you are linking into your HTML, how does it relate with your HTML elements? Now we need to state that it's an icon. Out there you can see some codes or resources to call it shortcut icon. It's still correct. Either you write icon or shortcut icon. Type. The type is that we are playing with images, okay, and working with PNG, JPG, JPG, JPEG, SVG, GIF, and so on. So in order for us not to go ahead listing and listing and listing, we can use the asterisk. The asterisk that covers all the file formats for images. Okay, so that's one basic thing about all the good use for the asterisk, but it's also a bad kind of selector because it might slow down your website if you are using it for your CSS, styling your CSS. It might slow down the website, might cause the waterfall to take a longer period of time. That's when you're checking the waterfall. How long did it take for colors or painting to come on a website? That's when you're looking at waterfall. Okay, we are not really gonna look at that for now. As we proceed, we'll study about the application network, waterfalls, painting period, and all of that, and how to optimize our web products. Okay, so we are done with our site icon. We can jump into the next sensitive information, which is the site title. For the site title, we use the title element tag. The title element tag. One most special feature about the title element tag is that by default, this title element tag implements what we call tooltipping. That's this tooltip to tooltip. Okay, we'll see that in action when I'm done. So you can call this junior level. You can call this junior level. Okay, so now you have done your title and we can call this junior level. You can then move into the next sensitive description. For the site description, we use the meta element tag to accomplish this. In order to achieve this, we use the meta element tag, and there are tons of, should I say, attributes that goes hand in hand with the meta element tag. We have the HTTP equivalent EQIV. This is an attribute that goes with the meta element tag. We also have the name attribute and we have the content attribute. And here we'll be using the name attribute and the content attribute. And then for the contents, we describe our website. Since we are starting off with junior level, we can write I am learning HTML5. Okay, so that's for your site description. Whenever the link of our web product is shared on social media platforms or anyway, this is the description that will pop up with the site icon that will pop up as a kind of information, a short information, and a brand identity about our web product, and if it's a company, about the company. Okay, so that set encoding. For the site character set encoding, we also use the meta element tag to achieve this. And in order to achieve this, we use the encoding. Now the UTF-8 encoding is an encoding that supports any special character for the US, be it the Chinese characters and their write-ups, the Japanese, and so on. When we were sticking to, or programming the HTML was sticking to ASCII, ASCII, that's this character set encoding, ASCII, ASCII character set encoding. These things really supported varieties of word text, or should I say text that we can produce with a we can produce HTML entities that we can use combination of alphanumeric, okay, with special symbols from our keyboard. This should produce symbols like that for us. But with the ASCII won't support that. So in order for us to be able to achieve writing Chinese text on our website, Japanese text on our website, and special symbols like Naira on our website, we need to use UTF-8 encoding, the character set encoding, to achieve that. Okay, so that's for the character set encoding. One thing you need to really understand about this sensitive information, some users might not pay attention to this information. Now, visitors on your website, pay attention to what they are seeing. That's the white page, which is the body section of your website. Okay, so but for the search engine like Google Chrome and Badu, DuckDuck, Yahoo, and so on, this and Microsoft Edge, like this make the search engine get the right information about your web product, it's important that you set this information. You have to put them in place. Since the group chat, I've dropped an article that talks about this, okay? But for a takeaway, I would like to explain. Now, for this, you can also achieve this using the meta element tag and using the HTTP equif. Okay? Then assign your content on page for 5 seconds. That's why you are seeing five. And then we want to, after 5 seconds, we redirect to a particular URL, https google.com. So after 5 seconds on my homepage, it will redirect. Sorry for this typo error. HTTP. Okay. So it's one way of implementing redirects on your website, redirecting from one web page to another. So that being said, this is the most important sensitive information that should go at the head section of your website when building your website with HTML or your web product with HTML. We also have that for the keyword on how to set your keyword and all of that. But you know, Google how algorithm out there does not work with that anymore. So that being said, I would like to take a bow and in the next body the body section of our HTML. If you have any question you can ask, drop your comments right below this video and we'll do well together.